Hello and welcome to another short film. This time I'm going to try and fix the fuel gauge on the 56 Mercury. The car came with a new fuel tank and a new sender unit, but that's not to say that the sender unit's any good. I have found to my cost on many occasions that when I fitted brand new parts, I've then discounted that item whilst trying to trace a fault because it's new, and then it turns out that that part was actually no good. Starter motor, something that springs to mind. I've done that a few times. So I've got to assume that the sender unit may be no good. So we're going to start with the back end in the trunk, having a look at the sender unit and the power feed to it, and then we'll look at the dial. My suspicions are with the gauge. That's only because there's a fair few problems with the whole gauge cluster, and I think it may be an earth issue on the whole thing, but we'll just go through the whole process of elimination and see where we get. Having a fuel gauge with a V8 is quite a good thing, but anyway, right, let's make a start. Right, so ignition on, and the gauge doesn't move. I know it's got about 2/3 to 3/4 of a tank in there, because that's obviously the first thing to check. Have you actually got any fuel? So I know there's fuel in the tank, and with ignition on, nothing's happening at the gauge. Okay, so the first thing we're going to see is if we've got any power to the actual sender unit, which is on the top of the fuel tank in the boot or trunk. So to get to it, it's just got this little cover plate. And there we are. Now, interestingly enough, the one bolt that attaches the cover plate also acts as the earth strap, so I might put that back on. Now, next thing to check is, in theory, if I disconnect the power lead, the gauge should read full. If that lead's faulty, and the gauge still reads empty, so in theory that's not the power lead from the gauge to the sender unit. Right, here we are on the behind the dashboard. It's very difficult to film, so excuse the quality. Right in the middle of the picture there's a green terminal and the yellow terminal. The yellow terminal's got a yellow wire, and the green terminal's got black wires, black wire that seems to join onto other black wires. I think that must be the power, and I think the yellow there must go off to the sender unit. So I'm not 100% sure on that yet, but one of the tests to do now is disconnect the yellow terminal, if that's the right one, and if the power goes up, if the gauge, sorry, goes up to full, then there's a fault. That wire is actually earthing out somewhere, so I'm going to try that next. I'm going to have to put the camera down because I can't get my hand in as well as the camera. Okay, I've disconnected. Right, I've disconnected the yellow wire. Let's put the ignition back on. No, gauge isn't moving, so in theory that's not the issue. Right, I've just put a meter on the green connection with the black lead, and that is in fact power, with ignition on obviously. That's got power, so there's power going to the gauge. I've disconnected here the yellow terminal, and it's actually pretty nasty. It was, I don't know if this will camera picking up, but it's a bit sort of black in places. It seemed to be stuck to other bits of wire, so that's never a good sign. Yeah, that's yellow, and actually the wire going to the sender unit is also is yellow, so that makes sense. So I'm going to replace this wire, just of a temporary one, so just we can discount that issue. So that's my next thing. Okay, so run a lead, temporary lead from the sender unit, just run it outside the car, right to the back of the fuel gauge. So let's see if I turn the ignition on. And still nothing. Right, we're back with the sender unit. This is the original wire to the fuel gauge. This is the new temporary one, so the other end of it is attached to the fuel gauge. Ignition's on. I just wanted to see, put it on the earth. Yeah, so we're getting power going into the fuel gauge, power coming out of the fuel gauge to the sender unit. So the next thing I think is having a look at the gauge. It's either stuck or maybe no earth. Let's go and have a look. Okay, I'm going to add a temporary earth wire. The other end I've attached to one of the mounting screws of the fuel gauge. It's got two mounting screws. I've undone one and the other one I'm going to touch to a good earth. Let's get some ignition on. Yeah, fuel gauge reading nothing still. Let's find a, that's a good earth, I think. Nope. Right, so I think we've more or less eliminated the wiring as an issue. So the issue can only be really the actual fuel gauge or the new sender unit. And you can test the sender unit. I've never done this before, so we'll give it a go. Got to take it out. If the tank is empty, it should be on 0 ohms, and the tank full, in other words the float up to the top, should read about 30 ohms. So we'll see if that's doing what it should be. So to take it out, obviously disconnect the two leads there. It's just a series of crosshead screws, and then that lifts out. Right, I've undone the 6 screws. I've given it a good clean and a blow around here just to stop dirt falling into the tank. Also be very wary not to drop anything in it, because you're not going to get them out without a lot of hassle. So let's lift the sender unit out, and there's the float. Just going to put this cover back over just to stop dropping stuff in there. Okay, so on the kitchen table test lab, got the sender unit. I've got my multimeter set onto ohms, 200 ohms setting. I've put with the careful use of some clove pegs, put the positive onto the power terminal and negative onto the earth terminal. Now in theory, you can see the meter there, currently the float, so if the float is on full, then reading nothing, and float on empty, also reading nothing. So whether my meter's packed up or that is really, the sender unit is really not doing anything at all. Right, I've had a good look at the sender unit, and it seems that that contact there isn't actually touching or making contact with the strip along there. So I'm going to try and bend that contact down and see if it gives us a reading. Okay, so I've bent a little tab that makes a contact along here, so it's actually touching now. I'm getting a reading. There we are. So this is with the float in its uppermost position, which means it's full. We're reading sort of 79, 80, and then so I can't do this with one hand, and then down the bottom we're reading, I think it is nothing actually, which is yeah, it settles down 0. So it's sort of 0 to 70, which I think is correct, hopefully. I've also found that my meter has got a broken terminal, so I'm going to need a new one of those. So that was giving me dodgy readings as well. So fault finding can be interesting, and the fault can be anywhere, including in your trusty tools as well. Anyway, so I'm going to put the sender unit back on and see if we get anything. Okay, so moment of truth. I put the sender units back in, connected up. Time for the ignition on. If we don't get anything, I think it's going to be a new sender unit. But anyway, ignition on. Absolute magic. Now I think that should go, in theory, just over the halfway mark. Yeah, so never trust new parts. That was a new one that came with the car, and it was just a badly put together part, a Friday afternoon part as they call it. I'm kind of tempted that next time I order some parts I might buy another sender unit, because they're not very expensive, because I can see that one causing me some more trouble. But in the meantime, it says half, which I think is about right. I'm going to carry a gallon can of fuel with me in the boot or trunk, just to make sure, because I can see me running out. I'm sure that's not particularly accurate, but anyway, good result. I think we've fixed that, and thanks for watching.